Good afternoon. Welcome to the Politics Show in the Midlands. Coming up today, how can you keep the streets safe while cutting spending? We're joined live by our region's top policeman taking on the curious case of the disappearing budgets.
And I'll be live in Solihull, where the local council's taking tips from Japanese car makers on how to be more efficient. So what can the private sector teach the public sector about doing more for less?
Too many chiefs, not enough Indians. So says one former West Midlands police officer turned blogger in his postings called The Thin Blue Line. It'll become thinner still as our police forces feel the sharp end of the government's reform agenda, job losses, budget cuts and changing working practices. They're facing cuts of up to 20% over the next 4 years. What price the safety of our streets? Well, I'll be asking a Labour MP who's warning of an explosion of crime, a Conservative who's written a book entitled Policing for the People, and the Chief Constable of England's biggest police force outside London, preparing to lose jobs, around 2,000 job losses. That's coming up. Let's begin, though, with this report by Colin Pemberton on this further thinning of that thin blue line.
More drill, but this time in uniform. Nothing wrong with their about turns now.
Policing 1946 style. Many things have altered, some haven't. We still have constables, sergeants, inspectors, chief inspectors, superintendent, and so on up to chief constable. The ranking structure isn't up for change, but many other things are, and fundamentally. In the West Midlands force, the detail of exactly how things will change will be known in a couple of weeks. The Police Federation is anxious, but determined to protect its rank-and-file members.
There's a game about to start, but we don't quite know what the rules are yet. But it stands to reason over the last 10 years, police officer numbers have increased. So if we reduce those numbers, then there's a chance that crime could rise. I know some people think that we can do more for less, but I don't think so.
In a parliamentary debate last Monday, Labour MPs were even more fearful.
We may witness a law and order disaster and an explosion in crime.
So what will go? Will it be the local bobbies listening to the concerns of residents at a drop-in surgery, as here in Cannock? Can they really be unaffected by the changes to come? The political argument is still raging, and tomorrow it'll be focused here in Cannock. The Home Affairs Select Committee is moving en masse out of Westminster to a hall here in the town centre. They'll be talking about a national crime agency, controversial proposals for police commissioners, but still, crucially, that conundrum of how to cut police force budgets by up to a fifth at the same time as cutting crime. In that Westminster debate, the government remains certain.
The government believes that it is possible, including in the West Midlands, to make significant back office and middle office savings so as to ensure that resource gets to where the public want it.
But what is frontline and what is back office? In the custody block at Bourneville Lane Police Station in Birmingham, there's direct face-to-face contact with the public. 2 floors above them, taking 999 calls, civilian staff, direct contact with the public, but not face-to-face. Here, rationalisation is happening. The West Midlands force combining several call centres into 1 or 2 bigger ones. It could potentially become a regional call centre for the other forces too. But there's another option for big savings, according to the founder of the internet site The Thin Blue Line. It's run by a former West Midlands detective who's free to publicly express what many serving officers anonymously say on his website.
You have to look from the top, you have to look at the rank structure, you have to look at how many senior officers are actually engaged in what roles and how useful those roles are.
Collaboration between forces over, say, air support or over firearms training would bring savings, as would less bureaucracy. But can it really be enough? So just how thin may that blue line become?
Colin Pemberton reporting, and incidentally, for more on this, you can go to my blog, bbc.co.uk/Patrick Burns. Well, we're joined this afternoon by our region's top policeman, Chris Sims, the Chief Constable of the West Midlands, the biggest force in England outside London. Aidan Burley, the Conservative MP for Cannock Chase, that's the constituency which, as we've heard, will be hosting the Home Affairs Select Committee tomorrow, and Steve McCabe, the Labour MP for Birmingham Selly Oak, who's made that warning about an explosion of crime. Aidan Burley, to you first. You're saying that cutting the police budgets, the money going into the police, doesn't necessarily have to lead to a reduction in the quality of the service that they provide to us, the public. Bearing in mind the scale of what we're talking about here, that seems to beg a belief, really.
Well, it's not just us that's saying that. In fact, the independent Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary has said that over £1 billion can be saved in the police forces, 12%.
They said 12%, but your cuts go way beyond 12%.
Well, ours are 20% over 4 years, but actually you've got to take into account local police precepts, which make them about 16%. And then with changes in working practices, you actually close the gap. So our cuts are virtually the same as what the HMIC say the police can save without affecting, crucially, the front line.
Without affecting the front line, you're confident of that?
I think there are huge savings that can be made in police forces before they need to start cutting officers on the street.
Chief Constable, how can you do that?
Well, look, firstly, I think the numbers are slightly spurious. Certainly the precept issue is a red herring in this debate, I think. But the principle is that we can take some of our share of the burden of the spending cuts that are going on. And I am confident that we can continue to serve the public and protect the public in the way that we currently do.
So where are you going to cut it back if you're going to preserve the work at the front line, if you like?
Well, the first absolute truth is that any cutback of this scale means cuts in jobs. So we will lose some 2,500 jobs over the next 4 years, and about 1,000 of them will be police officers. But I do think that we must look at what they're doing rather than the job losses themselves, and we have an extensive period of programme of change going on that's designed to protect the things that matter. But I do think that the public ultimately will notice the changes that are going on.
Getting rid of, presumably, Steve McCabe, a lot of that back office work that your government heaped on the police force, that they can concentrate their resources where it matters, out on the streets.
Well, I'm not against any efficiency measures, and I think that's what Project Paragon was partly about. The argument is that if you front-load the cuts so that the heaviest cuts come in the first 2 years, it's much harder to make efficiencies. And of course, if you sack civilian staff, you inevitably take police off the street to do the admin tasks.
But your warning of an explosion of crime was alarmist, wasn't it, to say the least?
No, I said I feared it, and why I fear it is we have a government that says it's going to cut bureaucracy, but actually it's cutting all the institutions of law and order, courts, prisons, probation officers and frontline police officers.
Aidan Burley shaking your head.
Well, I mean, one of the legislation we're taking through the Commons next week is to get rid of the stop and account form, which is a ridiculous piece of legislation the last Labour government introduced, which meant that for every time a police officer stops someone, they have to fill in a form. And I've spoken to officers who say they don't want to stop a car full of 5 youths because it would have to spend 50 minutes filling out 5 forms saying why they stopped them.
Quick word on that, Steve.
Well, I think, actually, you'll recall that there's a good reason why police have to record why they stop people. And the idea, I'm all for trimming forms, but the idea that you can abolish any record is absurd.
Do you feel, Chief Constable, and I've heard politicians saying, that the police service is the last great unreformed public service in this country, that this really is an opportunity to look at greater partnership, air support, collaboration, maybe even mergers, reforming the rank structure. We've heard it all, haven't we? Is this the right time to do that?
Well, I think there's more we can do. There's a debate still within the service about whether the 43-force structure is appropriate, and many of us would love to move to bigger forces that were more resilient and more efficient. I mean, unfortunately, that's a debate that government doesn't want to have at the moment.
Aidan Burley, there is a reform agenda as well as cutting costs. And are you using the money as a pretext, if you like,
the government doesn't
reform?
want regional police forces, but what we do think there should be is much more joined-up procurement. I think most of your viewers will find it very surprising. There is no national procurement for things like police uniforms or cars or helicopters. You have 43 fiefdoms each doing it themselves, and there are huge economies of scale from things like joint procurement that just aren't happening at the moment, and that's where some of these savings can be made.
Yes, Chief Constable.
We can do more on procurement. Of course, much of it is procured with groups of forces, not individually. But I only spend about 10% of my budget on things that are procured. If I was to save 10% of that, that's only 1% of the 20% that's got to be found. So, you know, we need to concentrate on the big things that are going to close the gap, and that's about changing the number of people and changing the way we operate so that we can deliver service in different ways.
Certain things are going to have to go, and as we near the end of this conversation, I'd like a quick word from each of you, if I would, on this business of police community support officers, which have been brought in under the previous Labour government, it has to be said, to raise, among other things, the visibility, the accessibility of the police. Do you think they're something that could be under threat as a result of this? Steve McCain.
Well, we couldn't get an answer at the debate last week about the future of them, but if we lose them, the public will notice.
Well, no one wants to lose PCSOs, but I'm afraid the reality is at the moment you can sack a PCSO, you can sack a police staff member, but you can't sack a police officer because the Office of Constable doesn't allow that to happen.
Final word from the Chief Constable.
At the moment, the budget for PCSOs is ring-fenced. There's no incentive to change the numbers. I wouldn't want to lose PCSOs, but ultimately we've got to look at the whole full structure and make rational changes.
And something's got to go. There's no way around the fact that you can't just salami slice your way out of this.
We can't salami slice. We've got to do this in a logical, professional way.
Well, this debate will continue in Cannock, but that's where we have to leave it today. But enjoy tomorrow, and it should be a very productive day, I hope. Thank you very much for being with us here this afternoon. And we'd like your views on the police cuts and the future of your local force. Remember, the Home Secretary has told the police they have just one objective: to cut crime. But how can they do it while they're also chopping their budgets? Call us now on 0845 300 1138, not forgetting to tell us your name and where you're calling from. Or you can email politicsshowwestmids@bbc.co.uk. I'll have your comments a little later in the programme. Thank you for the overwhelming response to our conversation about the police. Margaret emails us from a small village in Leicestershire. She says, very seldom see a policeman round here, so if they're cut, we'll hardly see any of them at all. So there we are. More on that, I'm sure. But a reminder that from later today, you'll be able to watch this programme